Welcome to Highly Affected by Her Surroundings, the podcast where we reveal how your environment can make or break your day. Hosted by me, Nicole Roe, owner and lead designer at Nixon Interiors. Today's guest is someone whose work I have admired for a long time, and not necessarily in the way you might be thinking. Sarah Lyon is a freelance writer, stylist, and creative force in the design world. She is a regular contributor to some of the most respected publications in home and lifestyle: Architectural Digest, Frederick, House Beautiful, Good Housekeeping, Real Simple, The New York Times, and many more. Her work sits at the intersection of design, storytelling, and culture, which is exactly why it resonates so deeply with the listeners of Highly Affected by Her Surroundings. Beyond her writing, Sarah is an experienced home stylist who works with designers, contractors, editors, and brands to prepare spaces for photo shoots, campaigns, and events. She has an extraordinary ability to transform rooms, whether they're lived in or completely empty, using vintage finds throughout layering and deep understanding of how spaces should feel, not just how they should photograph. Her social media is a masterclass in vintage sourcing, restraint, and taste. And she's currently working on a book, something that I cannot wait to see come to the world in 2027. But on a personal note, I am always honored when Sarah includes me and my firm in her work. She is generous, sharp, and incredibly talented. And today we're diving into her point of view on design, vintage, storytelling, and the role thoughtful spaces play and how we live and work. Sarah, welcome.
Wow, thank you. That was like the nicest introduction ever. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's so true. But yeah, so I know I just said a lot, but kind of give everybody like your point of view of, what you do and really how you got started in this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you covered a lot of different things that I do, but so I'm a full-time freelance journalist contributing to a number of design and lifestyle publications, like you said. I also greatly love design myself. So again, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see I'm always kind of tinkering and moving things around in my own apartment, which is so fun and definitely a little bit addicting, especially in New York where space is limited. I'm like, okay, what can I do that's still, going to fit in my tiny apartment? But yeah, so I started out my career working in magazines at American Baby magazine, which was under Meredith Corporation and then folded kind of in the mid 2010s, unfortunately. But I had worked on the college newspaper when I was a student and had interned in New York. And so I knew I wanted to go into journalism, and this job happened to open up, and I was so excited to be an editorial assistant on the staff there. And I truly learned so much just with interviewing, fact checking, finding sources. I mean, at 22 years old, working at a baby publication was a little bit funny. And, I was like, I don't know anything. Although now I feel like I still remember like the basics. And so, that was fun. And it was a great foundation. Then I actually kind of had an interesting career shift. I decided to go back to school and get my master's in higher education. And that kind of stemmed from working on the newspaper in college. I loved covering like the different higher education issues and things on campus. And so I sort of thought, okay, let's just give this a try. I might be able to kind of combine my interest in both writing and communications and education. So I did that program, and then I went to work first at a K through 12 school and then at George Washington University. And I worked in the alumni relations department, first in the business school and then in the engineering school. So while I was in those roles, it was mostly like events focused, and I did do communications, but I kind of missed the creative aspect of feature writing and just being able to flex my journalism skills. And so I ended up freelancing part-time while I was working. And so what was great is a lot of the people I'd interned with in college or had worked with in the city were going on and becoming editors at a whole range of different publications. And so even though my first job was at American Baby, which obviously was not home focused, home was always my passion. And I, even in DC was like shooting my apartment. I remember my first photo shoot, the guy only charged me $100 and the images got picked up a couple of places. So I'm like, okay, I'll take it. And, for being like 25 years old, I was like, that sounds great. So I always was into the home. And when I was able to start freelancing, I first was at apartment therapy, contributing, and I did some work for Country Living. And those are both places I still write for now. It hasn't always been continuous, but, kind of bop around. And so after freelancing part-time for 3.5 years, I really saw everything, first of all, pick up during COVID. And so that was kind of a turning point for me where I thought, maybe I could do this full time and this is something I would really love to pursue. And ultimately in 2021, I ended up going out on my own full time, and New York was calling my name. I loved living in DC. That's where I'm from. But I decided I wanted to go back to New York. And so here I am. So that's kind of the long-winded and very maybe not what people would expect backstory, but that's how I got to where I am now.
But I think the common ground there is there's a lot of being brave as part of that. Being in a city, working for these publications, you weren't an expert in babies,
Yeah.
then moving to New York and freelancing, that can be a very scary world, but you've seemed to really make a strong foothold in it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, I really wanted, and the good thing too was I liked the job that I was in full time. So that made it a lot easier. It wasn't, I'd had terrible jobs in my 20s that I wish I had some sort of backup plan, but I didn't. So I just had to stay there until I could find a new job. But with this, it was okay, you really want to feel ready. I think if you already like your day job, if you're trying to switch careers. So that made it easy to kind of just, once I kind of looked at the numbers and everything, I was okay, I'm ready. And, I don't want to compromise my current lifestyle too much and everything like that. So yeah, I think I kind of always tell people don't work yourself to the point of burnout, but definitely try to do your side thing with your full-time thing as long as you absolutely can, because you'll be in so much better of a spot to kick it off full-time when that time comes.
Well, I think the word burnout is really real for you too, because being a creative, whether you're a writer or in interiors or in, kind of the mix in between,
Yeah.
when you are pushing yourself that hard, those creative mindsets are really hard to find.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky that I do really enjoy what I do. And I feel very self-motivated by, the entrepreneurial side of working for myself. I think, maybe I would have really thrived in a sales type field or something with a commission, because I feel if I were going back to an office, because I just feel so, everything kind of holds a little more weight when it's for your own business. Even going to take a meeting. That's such a common part of any job that you kind of do that to check it off and say, to your boss, okay, met with some prospective clients and, but I think when it's your own company, you're so invested. And so there is kind of this energy that pops up for sure.
Yes, it's very much that founder energy, where you
Yeah.
see the entrepreneurs and the startup companies, but that is the same with what you have to do on a daily basis. And it is filling the pipeline, but doing things that elevate your brand. Because I think
Yeah.
personal brand is one of the things I wanted to talk about through this. And
Yeah.
for those of you that aren't watching on YouTube or the clips, from behind Sarah right now is it's pure magic, but it is who you are. When I think of
Yeah.
what your living room would look like, it is the vintage art and some of the oddities and the
Yes.
sculptures and these things. So I think talk about a little bit how your personal brand has evolved from, your early 20s to now.
Yeah, I've definitely become much more interested in vintage than when I was right out of school. And I think part of that is just because in the past 10 years, vintage has become so much the norm. And I think, especially during COVID with supply chain issues and people wanting it now and, sustainability, I think vintage really has popped up to the forefront. I think also as someone in my 30s versus being kind of someone starting out in my 20s, I'm willing to take a little more risks. I know my personal style a little bit more. And so you mentioned the book that I'm working on, and one element of that I kind of talk about is vintage shopping or secondhand shopping becomes a lot easier once you know your personal style, because you don't feel like you're looking for a needle in a haystack, in the sense of oh, I think this is cool, but I don't really know. And, once you kind of know, okay, do I European influence? Do I like more minimalist? Do I something else eclectic? It's so much easier to find the pieces that you want. And so I think just years of being on Pinterest, even literally scrolling through Instagram, looking at magazines, writing for these publications, has really helped me to fully form my style. And I think, yeah, also living in New York, you really do have to get creative with small spaces and a lot of the vintage pieces are a lot smaller too. So that's always nice.
I am someone who has been obsessed with vintage for honestly as long as I can remember, but I remember my initial thoughts of what vintage were very like farmhouse, old American, very
Shabby
country.
chic. Yeah.
Yes, and that is not
Yeah.
what my vibe is at all, but it took me finding over the years, like you said, defining your eye of what you were looking for. And now I can go even to the shabbiest, secondhand or vintage shop and find something awesome. But for you, like, what is it about the vintage pieces that new items like really can't replicate?
I think for me personally, it's like the one of a kindness. I mean, obviously, not everything that you get vintage or secondhand is one of a kind. And also, like as an aside, secondhand is such a good way to get like that Anthropology or Lulu in Georgia thing, like cheaper, because you can go on Facebook Marketplace and you see a lot of new brands too. And I have done that. But I think these days I try to really steer towards true vintage. So yeah, I guess like vintage and secondhand aren't always one and the same, just as, when I mentioned those words. But yeah, I think what really, appeals to me is the individuality of it, just especially living in, kind of a world of like this beige, which, I know designers say that's over, but I still see so much of it on the internet and everyone's like getting the same couch and it's white and they have white walls and, it's just so one and the same. And so I think I like, in addition to the uniqueness, I think stuff was just made better. I mean, that's like a fact is these pieces were built to last. I love the stories behind them. I love that you can mix different eras more easily than you can with modern furniture. So yeah, I think just a whole bunch of things.
So aesthetics, obviously, it's kind of it
Oh,
adds
yeah.
factor and all of that, but let's talk energy because I am a big believer in the energy of a space, and I think you are too. So what does kind of vintage items do to the energy of a space?
I mean, I think they just make it so much more character filled. And that's like what I really crave. I feel like when you walk into a home that's just IKEA, which literally was my first apartment. So not to diss, and my parents even have IKEA. Like we've had IKEA in our house, my entire life. But I think, and you can mix that though with vintage. So I think like finding those pieces that have character and are really telling a story about who you are, where they were before is so special and really adds like this soul and feeling to your home that I think is hard to find today, especially as like a lot of, I keep mentioning living in New York, but it was something on my mind. Like so many of the apartments here are just so cookie cutter. You're not, in another part of the country, you might find these houses with like beautiful historic detail. Like when I lived in Philadelphia for school, that was so much more the case. And here, that's like kind of happening in Brooklyn, but those are usually a lot pricier. And so, yeah, I think vintage really helps me make the most out of kind of like a shoebox cookie cutter home, which I love.
No, I love that. And I think everybody kind of has a different approach when they go to a flea market or they go to a vintage shop or an estate sale. Like we have like our strategy. Can you like
Totally.
walk everybody through what your strategy is?
Yeah. So I always say to do multiple laps. So the first lap, you're just kind of getting a lay of the land. There's a flea market here in the city that I go to almost every weekend. I haven't been in a while because it's been so cold here and the holidays and everything, but I'm hoping to go tomorrow because the weather's warmed up a little bit. So I kind of just go through and there's people who are kind of like my trusty, like I usually will get something from them. And so I kind of try to check them out first. But so after I do my first loop, I kind of think, and obviously if there's something that really catches my eye, I'll buy it right then and there. But what's so crazy is other times there's stuff I don't notice until the second time. And one day I was there, and that's the hard thing too, is I feel like I want to find something because it is like, I mean, it's only half an hour each way, but you're still like, oh, I got up early and I put in the time and I'm cold. And, like I could just be sipping coffee on my couch on a Saturday morning and instead I'm out. So I'm always like, okay, no, I have to find something, even if it's really tiny and $5. But so I was doing a second lap and I found like these two beautiful pieces of art that were huge. I don't even know how I missed them. I think that wasn't like at the forefront of my mind. And yeah, so always do a couple laps, always. And I think with that too, like people might be looking at stuff and put it back. So it's always good to see like, okay, maybe that woman who was standing looking at that really cool jacket tried it on and it didn't fit. And like, you don't want to hover over the person, but it's worth doing another lap. And, I've gotten stuff that way for sure. I also, I'll text like other designer friends if I ever have like questions about, okay, could you see this working? I mean, usually I'm pretty confident in my own style, but I think, and sometimes I kind of only want to hear what I want to hear. So, you want someone to enable you to be like, yeah, that's great. Like with the art, I texted one of my friends who's an interior designer in the city, and he was like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing. Yeah, you have to get that. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, so yeah, I would say a mixture of kind of like trying to visualize. Sometimes I'll even like pull up pictures of my home and be like, would this go here? Or like, even showing the vendor who, they'd be like, oh yeah. I mean, obviously they're trying to make a sale, but they're not like overly pushy. And I think people are like, oh yeah, that would actually look so great. And yeah.
I think it's funny of knowing which friend to text. It's like, do you
Oh
want
yeah.
somebody to tell you no? Like tell you don't buy that, that's
No,
a bad idea, it's too
you,
expensive? Or do
you
you want the
will.
friend that's gonna be like, do it?
No, but he's brutally honest. And like, that's why I think his opinion means more than the friend who's like, just do it. Because he's like, oh no, don't get that. And then other things, it's like, yeah, totally. That's so cool. And so it's so funny though, because I think, yeah, with like, of course, and with my girlfriends, I think I'm much, I think with like a guy, it's like you can be a little more blunt. With a girl, you're like, oh yeah, that's so lovely, like I would never want to offend someone, but I think someone who's in the industry is pretty, blunt.
No,
It's a
and
good
I
friend
think
to have. Yeah.
it's a fun story behind it too. And I know for
Yeah.
me, like I have kids, and if
Okay.
we're out of town or wherever they are, they will like I'll have one or two of them with me when we go in and do a loop at whatever this store is.
Yeah.
And there's times that they're like, you cannot put that in our house. And then there are other times they're like, we want that in our room, like that is so cool. Or what's the story?
Yeah.
So it's definitely, but there's been times I've bought stuff and not shown anyone because I'm like, this is weird. They may not like it, or it was more money than I should have spent, but I had to have it.
Well, and
And
with this art, it was funny because I was going over to a different friend's house that day, and she's not a designer, but she's taken some design courses online and is kind of toying with it. And so I had shown her these pieces, just some pictures on my phone, and she was like, you're not going to like these because they just were so not her style. And I was like, but I have a vision. They're going to look amazing framed. They're going to go here. And then a couple months later, she came over and saw them and was like, oh yeah, that really worked. So, I think that's the other thing I should add about like when you're at the flea market is not quite being so literal. Like there's obviously things you can change about a piece. You can get a new lampshade for that lamp. You can get a new frame for the art. You can get a new art for the frame. So I think just like trying to remember that there is like refurbishing and, upgrades that can happen. Obviously, you probably don't want to spend a ton of money on something that you got for like $20. But I think, even if you come across a bench and it needs like a new cushion, there's so many things that you can just kind of be open to. And so I try to like keep my imagination present for sure.
I think too with the frames, there's been times, especially when I travel, where I've been like, I don't want the frame. Can I just buy the piece of art?
Yeah,
So
I've
I
done
can
that too.
roll it or whatever. And almost every time they have said yes. And that makes it where then I can go. Most of the frames in my house are black. It's the style kind of my house. So I can
Yeah,
move stuff. But some ornate, frame and a really cool piece of art. I'm like, I don't need the frame. I don't want it to be wasteful. I'm sure somebody else will
right.
buy it.
Well,
So
and it's
that's a
a
good
good
way
point,
too.
like when you are traveling. I mean, I've done that and just like left the frame in the hotel room by the trash can. Like, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I've been like cutting in with my nail scissor, trying to like cut the painting out of the thing. I did that when I was in Paris because I couldn't fit the frame in my suitcase. It was just too big and it was kind of dinged up. So I just rolled up the piece and it was fine. It was probably would have been a little better to keep it in the frame, but yeah, I was like, I don't want this to add weight to my suitcase and I'm just going to throw it away when I get home. So
I am totally picturing that frame just sitting by, the dumpster wherever.
so confused, but I'm sure people have left much weirder things. So
100%. And somebody could have found it and been like, I can paint this. I can use this.
yeah,
This is
I would
awesome.
love
So,
if someone reused it. Yeah.
yeah, very, very cool. Okay. But I think going back to the second lap, I think that is huge in a space because it's like take the overall vibe, do the
Yeah.
second lap. And then one thing people get kind of overwhelmed with is the whole like haggling or price negotiation.
Yeah.
Do you ever try to play that game or are you more sticker price?
I'm probably more sticker price if I think something is really such a good deal. Where I do play that game is in Paris, where I love to travel, and they have obviously amazing flea markets, they fully expect you to negotiate. And also everything is done in cash. So I think here it's a little harder because my flea market, sometimes they like cash, but a lot of times they're like, oh, you can just Venmo or whatever. And so I will negotiate a little bit if I'm buying, especially if I'm buying multiple things. Like for the art, I bought 2 pieces of art. So I was like, well, would you do 2 for X? And he said, sure. Or he sometimes like the people even offer because they just, they don't want to load it back in their car. Because it's different than like an antique store where they live there the whole time. These are like people coming from states away sometimes. So I think with that, yeah, I'll negotiate if I'm not like in love with something. But it was funny because I was in Paris and I saw this beautiful tapestry, like truly, if I were to resell it, could sell it for like 4,000 or 5,000. I mean, I list it for that. I don't know if it'd sell for that, but crazy. And the guy was selling it for 20 euros. Handed him, I was like, oh my gosh. And I made him like type it down because I don't, like French numbers and stuff. And I was like, what? And I just took it and ran. But it's like, so obviously with stuff like that, sometimes there's something that was truly too good to be true. But, even just something that's a good deal, I'm not going to like nickel and dime them. But in Paris, generally, when it's not like the find of a lifetime, yeah, I definitely am more, because it's like, I don't want to run and get more cash. I also like would love to save a few dollars where I can. And so that's a little more versus a Venmo. It's a little harder to be like, oh, could I give you, 17 instead of 20? Or sometimes people are open to that though. What do you think? Do you like to negotiate?
It's a combination of both. Sometimes it can be very uncomfortable because this is something people are proud of. I think buying in bulk, like if you're buying 6 or 7 things or 2 or 3 things, it's easier. Right. Or when they know you're an interior designer, or if they know you're selling it to a client, because a lot of times it is that, hey, I'm sourcing for a client's house, that game a little bit. But I'm curious more. I've never done any of the flea markets out of the country. So for someone who hasn't, but I am going to Paris this summer.
Oh my gosh. Text me.
Yes. What are the differences? So like in America, you go to, Rose Bowl, you go to whatever, like I get that. But when you go abroad, you said cash, can it be American dollars? Does it have to be euros? What does that look like?
And it was so funny because my mom was asking me that because she's like, oh, well, when I was your age, like the American dollar, like they wanted those. And I was like, no. So what I do is, I'll just go. I mean, there's ATMs everywhere. It's like being in New York City. And, and actually the sellers often know where they are too. So they'll say, oh, So what's hard for me is I don't speak French. So don't be intimidated at all because I truly speak like 2 words of French. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. That said, I think like being like the culture is just so different. So I think being very like polite, I mean, you should always be polite, but I think there, it's really important. You start like, bonjour, you have to say hello. You can't just kind of say, how much is this the way you could in the US. So I think like just remembering to be a little more like subdued, I think, than maybe in the US and friendly is important. So I usually like to go take out some cash like at an ATM by my hotel when I leave for the flea market in the morning or, take it out the night before after dinner. But then when I'm out, I usually know like, okay, there's within a 5-minute walk, there's another one. And so I like to go, they start really early. That's one different thing is they'll start at like 7 or 8 a.m. And in the US, it's like that. Maybe sometimes that's happening for like a once a month situation. I went to one in California once that was like by flashlight, which was a whole experience. But this, they do start early. I usually don't get there until 8 or so. I mean, they're still kind of setting up and people like to sleep in. So, but I mean, even 8 is like a lot earlier than most people would go in the US. So get there early. Most of them change locations every week. So that's like a confusing thing is for me, like the Chelsea Flea in New York, I have my whole little routine. Like I know, okay, 30 minutes away, I get off at this subway stop. I like to get coffee here after whatever. These, you don't know mostly where they're going to be until that week. So there's a few accounts on Instagram that I like to follow. And then there's some websites too that you can look up and they'll post. Most of them are just people like us who like live there and are really into the flea markets. So they'll post like, okay, Saturday, and they'll list all of them, and then Sunday. And so I'll just screenshot and then, Google Map based on where my hotel is or where I'm going to be that day. And go accordingly. So that's kind of like fun, but it's hard to plan because I'm about to go actually on Sunday for Deco Off Design Week over there. And I'm hoping the following weekend to hit some of the markets. But I'm like, well, I'm not going to know till Wednesday or Thursday where they're going to be. So who knows where I'll be going.
Which that is interesting because as a planner, someone who's already like, this is what I'm going to do. This is, this is the route we're going to take from the Eiffel
Yeah.
Tower to get croissants, the very cheesy things.
Yeah,
That's
you
really
have to kind
of how flexible you have to be.
and also like Paris is big. So you just have to accept like you probably aren't going to make it to all of them, and that's okay. And what's funny though is the ones that move around, if you go like on a Saturday to one and then you go on a Sunday, you might see some of the same people. So the last time I was there, I saw a man and he had spoken pretty good English, which is why I remembered him, but he had sold me something and then I saw him again and I was like, oh, hey, wait, remember you sold me that glass vase? And he was like, oh yeah. So it is funny where like, yeah, at my local flea market, it's like generally they're even in the same like area of the market. I mean, sometimes they move a little bit, but these people, it's like they could be in one end of the city, they could be in another. And so it's just kind of funny. But yeah, so I like that. And then also I always bring like a big bag with me. I'll often even travel. I don't know if you have a Hulken bag, but I have many. And I like to even bring one there.
And that's totally appropriate to roll around Paris with a Hulken.
Oh, okay. So it's funny because someone else asked me that. And like, again, I try to not, no one wants to be like standing out as an American.
Yeah.
My response to that was I do think, well, also as someone living in a big city, but I think like, living in a big city in Europe, they're so like utilitarian and like minimalist and stuff. So I could actually see no one, well, I've seen a few other Hulkens, usually other Americans and usually like dealers and stuff. But the rolling bags are still common there because people, it's like when you live in a city, you have to go out every day to get a couple of groceries for that day. Like you're not filling a trunk of a car with, your Costco. It's like you are kind of more mobile. And so I think that's actually like common there. Not like a pink Hulken the way that, we have, but a little rolling bag is fine as long as you're not like rolling it into people. Yeah.
It's better than the big old blue IKEA like plastic bag that we had.
Aware of those though, because those are like all over the world. So I mean, yeah, people like you got to do what you got to do. I think as long as you're respectful, it's totally fine.
Okay, then last question about this. How do you get the stuff home? I know you've talked about packing stuff in a suitcase, but is it always just like an extra suitcase or you leave room or a duffel bag? How does that work?
Yeah, I'll either leave room or at some of the little souvenir stands throughout the city, just where they sell like baseball hats and stuff. They'll usually sell suitcases. And I've learned you can actually haggle on the suitcase price with the little vendors there, even though it seems like that wouldn't be okay because it's a store, but they're kind of like usually just like family run or something. And so I'll just say like, hey, would you take, this? And usually if you're paying with cash, they're more flexible. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like the hard thing, but it technically I think is more economically reasonable to buy a suitcase there because checking a bag that's empty is so, I mean, checking bag period is expensive if you're flying internationally, but checking a bag that's empty, it's like, why would you spend $150 to check a second bag that has nothing in it? It's better to just check it one way. Yeah, but if you're someone who's more like, you're not going to go all out, I would bring like a fold up or like a Longchamp bag or something that's like really thin and can just live in your suitcase, or, even one of those like reusable bags that people keep in their purse that folds up. Yeah, or like an LL Bean, anything like that is totally fine too. I tend to go a little crazy. So
Okay, so talking about crazy is the term maximalism, because I think for a long time it was very negative. It meant cluttered and hoarder and like all this. And I think for me, I was like, I'm a minimalist. But then when I realized actually looking in my spaces, I am not a minimalist. I just like to have things that I like. So I would like your opinion on like what maximalism is, where you feel like you fall, and kind of how you can give people permission to do as the same.
So I agree with you. I think when like someone described my space as maximalist the first time a couple of years ago, I was so taken aback. It's like when someone says like some quality about you that you're like, that's not me. Like I've tried so hard to avoid, and you're like, what? But okay, so I think like with me, yes, I'm definitely maximalist. Like I do like to have a lot of like my stuff that I collect. Like I have a lot of books, I have trinkets. I do try to like curate what I'm displaying. So I feel like not everything is like out all at one time, or again, living in a small space, like I really, especially working from home, like I don't want to be overstimulated staring at like loud colors and piles and so I think I'm like an organized maximalist, if that makes sense. Like I really like clean lines. I'd like, everything to be like neatly arranged. And I was always like that as a kid. I was always like reorganizing my bookshelves and like my CDs and everything. And yeah, but I think like maximalism is back. I mean, the minimalism I feel like was such a big thing pre-COVID. And then I think when people were spending more time at home, they were like, no, I want to be surrounded by my comfort, my things, the things that bring me joy. And yeah, so people like go for it, be a maximalist.
And I think a good point there is authentic spaces. The minimalist is
Yeah.
very hard to show personality and be authentic. It looks like a designer just came in and gave you the bare minimum,
Yeah.
where, if you walk into someone's house that has yours example, has the stacks of books, and, they show the things you actually care about in your
Yeah.
travels, it tells a story and it feels more inviting.
Yeah. And I mean, some people think of maximalist and think of like, like green zigzag, well, like just crazy stuff. And it's like, I think for a long time I kind of did too. And then I was like, no, this word can like mean a lot of things. So
No,
yeah.
I agree. That doesn't mean like go to Home Goods and buy out like 4 shelves and, like not have any room for breathing. Cause I still think you need that breath, but I can appreciate your take on having lots of the things you love around you. Okay, I
Yeah.
want to talk about some of your writing a little bit. And you've definitely, because we have a lot of designers that listen to this, and a lot of
Yeah.
designers,
So glad.
want to be featured, want to be published. They want that,
Yeah.
but really like, what are editors and writers looking for? Whether I know sometimes you get pitched things, I would imagine, but then other times, you're asking for, quotes and
Yeah.
opinions. But, really, as a designer, what are, like what can we do to be, whether it's with you or others, to get our point of view across?
Yeah. So I always need more sources to comment for. I write a lot of trend stories. So I need, different opinions, and always am looking for new people to quote. So even if you don't work with PR yet, or you just like do that in house, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll definitely add you to my source list. I think one really good thing is when people have imagery of their own. I know some people, if you're starting out, you haven't invested in like professional photography, or you've only done a couple of projects, but I think people who can really prioritize the photography, it's so great. I mean, again, we have plenty of sources to draw images from as well, but I think it's so nice when you're able to supplement a comment with an image from one of your projects. And so I always tell people investing in your photography, even though it's such an expense and time commitment, is so important. I think it like really speaks for itself, and it just adds so much. So definitely that. I always appreciate, when people, I'm not covering a ton of home tours at the moment, but for people who are pitching those to other editors, not just sending a link to the photos, but kind of telling a story about the home, anything unique, like maybe this home has been in the family for 4 generations, and this is, what we did, or, the couple got married there, whatever, like whatever kind of the hook is, versus just a gallery of photos. Before and afters are always really interesting to editors. So if you have, a huge renovation, or even just a before and after design wise, those are always really cool to see. So yeah, I think just kind of being thoughtful with your pitches and thinking like, okay, what makes this a compelling story? And just also giving editors a little bit of time, because it can take so long for us to hear back from the people we're pitching out to, as well. And so, for example, for me being freelance, I don't get to really, I mean, other than the quotes that I'm reaching out asking for, I don't get to just decide if I'm going to run someone's home tour. So I think sometimes people think that it works that way more. And I'm like, no, I have to send this to an editor and see if it's a fit for them. And so that process can definitely take a little bit. So just kind of being patient, and following up is needed for sure, but just knowing it can take a little while.
Well, and I think one of the things too that is, I think I'm going to say challenging for everyone, especially with you. I'm sure you ask for quotes and then all of a sudden you get something that's completely chat GPT'd. And I have found, but I have also found where like I'll write something, like I'll write my answers and I'll click like polish on like on Gmail to make it sound better.
Yeah,
Then all
me
of a sudden,
too.
but then you throw that into like Chat GPT checker and it's like that's 87%. I'm like, but I wrote the whole thing. It just like, you try to make it better. So would you rather a designer send you their written words that have not been edited per se by AI,
Yeah,
and there may be some
sure.
errors or there may be some off things that you kind of have to adjust, or would
Yeah,
you
that's my
do
job.
you
It's my job to
okay,
check the errors. Yeah.
okay. So I guess
So
that's my
don't
thing.
worry.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it feels unprofessional a little bit, like I'm a
I
designer,
mean,
I'm not an English major,
long
but
as
then
you're doing the best
also,
you can. I mean, yeah, like as long as someone has tried, of
yeah,
course. Yeah. I mean, yeah, hopefully they've like sat down and they're not just typing it while they're out on a
yeah,
run, but like, yeah, of
yeah.
course. If someone has put in the time, yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's literally my job is to catch because the thing is ultimately this all reflects on me. Like if someone used Chat GPT, I'm gonna get the hit for that.
Yeah, I
So
know.
it's kind of like, yeah. So I have to really be careful, like checking things like that. And if I suspect something is, I won't use it. I mean, so not if it's like someone checked their grammar, but if something's just clearly like, but also what I tell people is like, I'm reaching out to you because you know the answers to these questions. They're not, these, you shouldn't need to check the answer with Chat GPT. I guess we're talking about like two different things because you're talking more about like the grammar and the spelling, but I think there's some people who I think just, think, oh, maybe I should feed the question in here. And I feel like we trust you. We trust that you know the answer because this is what you're doing, your job. And also the thing is we often kind of know the answer too because we've written about these topics so much. We want to hear from you because you're the expert. I'm not an interior design, as much as I know, I'm not cited as an expert in these pieces unless they're like a first person. So yeah, so I think just like being confident in your skill set and, submitting the best that you can is great.
I think knowing it doesn't have to be perfect, knowing that you guys and you in general are, comfortable making some of the edits and the tweaks to
Yeah.
make it sound better, as opposed to being like, you know, even telling chat, like, this is the question, this is, my answer. It still shoots out something that is obviously been AI'd. And it's, like, it's hard to compete with
Like,
both.
yeah,
Yeah.
these aren't like hit pieces. Like,
Yeah.
we're not like we're trying to make you look good too. So it's like, I think it's not like other types of journalism where it's like, oh, he responded and everything was, where they would even like mention that in the piece or something about someone. So no, it's like these are meant to just be like, wins for everybody. And, we're happy to check. I think the one thing is just sometimes like people might not answer all parts of the question. So just making sure that you're, reading the question and answering it kind of to its fullest, or providing more than kind of like a one word or one sentence, like yes or no answer. And the other thing is if we ask for photos with credit, just making sure that obviously the photos should be from your own projects, which seems like it should go without saying, but I've received all types of things. So photos with credit, just making sure that you name like your photographer, because often the thing is too, like I personally am writing 50 plus stories a month. So I might be emailing with you and it might seem like you're the only person I'm emailing with that day, but usually I'm kind of like filing your thing away and I might look at it again in a couple of days or in a week. And so it's nice just to have everything in there that I can pull up and not have to go back to the person, while I'm like putting the tweaks on it. So there's a lot of like moving parts for sure.
No, I think that's great for everybody to kind of just keep in mind. And it's
Yeah,
definitely, you want us both to look good. So I think that's like the ending of all
exactly.
of it is like your goal is for all of us to look good at the end of this and for us to
Yeah.
share, for us to be proud of it. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your styling and some of your services because it is an interesting side note with, being the writer, but also like your willingness to go into a space and tell a story with things. So
Yeah.
kind of like, how does that work? What are your favorite ways to do it? How has that looked in the past? Because I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious.
So I will say I haven't been doing this as much anymore in New York,
Yeah.
just because logistically it's a lot harder.
So
So it's not something I'm so much offering right now, but depending on the right project, I'm definitely interested in learning more. But yeah, so I have helped interior designers on shoots do the styling. And so what's interesting is some of these instances the people had, which I guess is common, but it's funny because like when you shoot, your own home, or I sort of assumed like you shoot it after the install and then like see ya. I thought that was how it worked, but I guess some of these people, they did the install and they never shot it. And so now it's 6 months later and they want it to be shot. And so those have been interesting because it is like a real family living there. And so it's a different challenge than just like a blank slate where, you might even be bringing stuff from your own collection that you're then going to bring home with you later. And, so those are like the projects that I've mostly done, or ones where we go in and then, put everything back at the end, or sometimes the families will like buy stuff off of the designer. And so another thing though that I have done, even though I haven't been physically styling as much in New York, is reviewing project images and then like virtually pulling products for designers to consider for their styling. And so that's actually like worked really well with like on both ends, because often people just need like new sources to look into, or they're just curious, like, well, what do you think? What would you put on this counter? Or what would you put on the nightstand? And that's been really cool because then they can just order, or, they can just find something like it. It doesn't need to be literally that item, but that's something I've really enjoyed as well. And I love sharing new resources and all of that. So it's been fun.
That is really cool because that does give you the ability to, I mean, you could hop on Cherish, you could hop on some of these others and find some neat things. And that then lets them, show the client too, like, hey, this is the shopping cart of things we'd like to invest in for your space.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with it?
Yeah. And I think like that's what's so interesting is I feel like sometimes the styling, like, because it's been after the fact, we know that the stuff won't stay there. It's going to just live in the designer's collection. But I think it's obviously better to invest in pieces because designers know this too, like too, they tell me this themselves, but you don't want all of your shoots to have like the same coffee table book or the same face, or, so I think that is, which is hard, especially as, there's a lot of really cute stuff that looks good in a lot of spaces. So I think, sometimes it's like not even intentional, but I think that is something like just to diversify with what you're displaying.
So a great point there is I bring a lot of my own plants to shoots.
Yeah.
And the joke of like, you can see the progression of the growth over the years.
That's
of like
so funny.
Some of these plants, especially the pothos, and some of the like ones that spill over. I'm like, that project was 4 years old. That project, was a year old, because you can see
so
how much
funny.
larger the plant is.
I feel like a plant is like a complicated thing to bring with you. So that's impressive. Like,
I will load up the Wagoneer with boxes of plants, but it is a fun point with your saying of the styling. Like I have noticed, like we bring a lot of books and there's times I'm like, oh, that one's been shot, facing that way. So we need to turn it.
Yeah. And I've even heard, this is so like in the weeds, but I think a stylist told me this once, that like she won't display books by like other interior designers that aren't that person. I think it's different if it's like Kelly Wertzler. She's not like anyone's peer, but like
anyone's
other, well, like, if it's someone, like Albert had, like someone who's not living, or like, one of the greats or whatever. But I think, but like generally, it's so interesting though, like generally speaking, she's like, I don't do that. I just display like art books or, nature books or something else. So that was interesting because I love all of my different designer books.
Same. Okay, a couple just quicker closing questions. What design rule do you think is meant to be broken?
Ooh, I need to think about that one. I would say,
I feel like there's some just behind you. Like literally, if you just turn around in your space, and I don't mean that as a negative, but it's like hanging art on the outside of a bookcase, leaning art.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good one. Well,
just little things like that. I think it doesn't have to be a, use whatever paint, differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I feel like professionals already know this, but I think like general people might not. That a small space doesn't need to mean small furniture. So that was something I learned. I mean, I feel like that is a design rule, but the rule for those who don't know, we can tell them that small spaces don't need to have small furniture. That's something that I definitely have struggled with over the years. And now I'm finally like getting used to, is like, you don't need a 60-inch. I mean, even if you can't fit like a 90-inch sofa, you don't need a 60-inch one either. You can do 72, you can do something in the middle. And I think like that's something that I've had to see like by trial and error, and definitely notice in other small spaces, people just go way too small, and you don't need to do that. It's going to look like a dollhouse. Don't be afraid to have a couple of bigger pieces.
Okay, what do you hope people feel when they read your work?
Oh, I hope they feel inspired. I love, again, because I write pieces that feature so many different designers, I love all the different perspectives. And again, that's why I really do want it to be your own voice and your perspective. And I love like just diverse ideas and, hoping that people kind of, learn something they wouldn't have thought to do before, even if they are a fellow designer.
Okay, if someone wants to elevate their home but doesn't know where to start, what would you say their first move should be?
Ooh, paint or wallpaper. I mean, wallpaper is obviously more expensive. I thought you were going to say if they're like on a budget or under $100, but okay. So say that they are though, paint. I mean, because you can always paint it back. That's my philosophy is like, people are so scared of paint, even in homes that they own. And like, I'm in a rental and I've painted multiple times, multiple colors, and you can just change it back. I mean, it takes like, it's annoying because you have to move all the furniture and like you have to commit to the time and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it just adds so much personality to a room. I have wallpaper in my bedroom that I love. I mean, it's truly brought so much life to that room. It's like night and day. So yeah. And also the thing is when you have paint, white paint, I think you still do need to like put stuff on the walls. But when you have a colored paint or wallpaper, you kind of don't need like as much stuff on the walls because that speaks for itself. So that's like a fun thing is I think filling your wall space can be really challenging for anyone. And so yeah, with the wallpaper, it's like just let that pattern be the art.
Okay, I love that. And let everybody know how they can find you.
Sure. So Instagram is the best place, Sarah Lyon 9, and then it has my email address on there as well. And I also have a website with past clips and a little more about me.
And it's definitely worth following her socials for the vintage finds, but also vintage sources for things. So, designers and everybody else, definitely give that a follow. But Sarah, this has been such a joy. Your work reminds people that design isn't just about what looks good, but it is about the storytelling and the intention and creating spaces that actually support the way we live and work. So I'm grateful for the way you show up in this industry, with taste, generosity, depth, and I cannot wait for your book to come into this world. And like I said, for everyone listening, we will link websites. We will also ask for links to the Paris, like where the flea market stuff is.
Yes.
And, your social media, but, follow her for vintage finds. I promise it is worth it. But thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. This was so fun and I'm so honored. I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Highly Affected by Her Surroundings. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the podcast. It helps others discover the show, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. For more behind-the-scenes content and design inspiration, follow us on social media. You can find me, Nicole, at Nixon Interiors, and the podcast at Highly Affected by Her Surrounding. We'll be sharing updates, sneak peeks, and exclusive offers you won't want to miss. Plus, if you want a recap or more details from today's episode, you can find the show notes at arnixoninteriors.com under the Highly Affected by Her Surroundings tab. Once again, thank you for your support, and I can't wait to connect with you on social. See you next time.